Got to get this stuff out there. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yellow Light Breen. I'm the president and CEO of the Maine Development Foundation. It's a great privilege to be here with you this afternoon to roll out the 2016 edition of Measures of Growth. It's MDF's great privilege to provide the staffing support and the research support over the last 22 years to make this product happen for the Maine Economic Growth Council. You'll hear from co-chair of the Growth Council, Steve Van Vogt. You'll hear from Director Mike Hersey on behalf of the executive branch. And I believe Representative Shant, who's a member of the Growth Council, will have to represent the entire Maine legislature this afternoon. It's kind of fitting that the legislature is in the throes of wrapping up a session focused on the specifics of bills and debates in front of them, because really the goal of Measures of Growth and the Growth Council is to provide a long-range vision that can guide those short-term policy decisions that every legislature is pressed to make. We take it for granted now that there's this respected, credible, nonpartisan, bipartisan roadmap of where the state is and an aspiration across all of these benchmarks of where the state's economy should try to move. But I was talking to one of the founding members of the Growth Council, and when the Growth Council was created in the early 90s, there wasn't that kind of credibility and consensus. There was a sense that there was no objective, nonpartisan sense of where the state stood economically or where it was driving towards that we could rely on that wasn't skewed by some kind of political lens. So the Growth Council was created in 1993, sets that vision, and I think this report has become the standard. And we at MDF build off of this trusted research. We try to amplify it with other research projects that we undertake. We try to build our support for leaders in both the legislature and in the private sector around this report. And we try to build our programming at MDF off of the foundation of this report. So we think it's critical to the state of Maine, and it lays that vision that we can all work towards. Over the last few months, a number of legislators have come up to me in the hallway and said, help us build a roadmap for our legislation out of the guidance of Measures of Growth. So I think that's the challenge, is to continue to work harder to try to translate the data and the benchmark visions into the actual policies and strategies that will move the state forward. So without further ado, I think I'm first turning this over to Program Director Ryan Neal. Ryan is the horsepower and the brain power behind the process and the product, and he'll walk you through a little bit of what's in there, and then we'll hear from several members of the Growth Council. Ryan?
Thanks, Yellow. I'm Ryan Neal. I'm a program director at the Maine Development Foundation. It's been my privilege to work with the council for over 6 years now. I can say it's not always easy, but it is both a challenge and a privilege, as Yellow mentioned. It's not always easy, but it is almost always interesting. The council does take its work very seriously. Members are committed to ensuring that its work is both meaningful and relevant for policymakers in the state legislature and the governor's office and throughout the state. I'd like to extend my own personal thanks to the council members who commit their time and energy to this work, a few of whom are here today. And I should mention, one of the things that makes the council members so good at their job is that they're connected and engaged. And it also means that it's sometimes tough for them to get away from their other responsibilities. So Susan Corbett of Axiom Technologies, the Honorable Jennifer DeChant, Tom Driscoll of ES Boulos Company, George Gervais, Maine Department of Economic and Community Development, Thomas Kittredge with the City of Belfast, John Napolitano, Plumbers and Pipefitters Union 716, the Honorable Matthew Pouliot, Steve Schley of Pingree Associates, Tim Walton of Chimbro. And we're very fortunate to have some new members join us this year. Luann Ballesteros of the Jackson Lab, Senator Jim Dill, Greg Dougal of the Maine Restaurant Association and Maine Innkeepers Association, and Mark St. Germain of St. Germain Collins. And finally, I want to thank the co-chairs, in particular, Steve Van Vogt and Andre Cushing, who has just joined us. And Andre, if you're ready to say a few words, I'd turn it over to you, if you have some time for us.
Thank you, Ryan. As I apologize, the Senate is in, so the bell may be ringing shortly. We're in a roll call, but I appreciate the opportunity to come here. I think it defines the importance to the legislative body and the general population of policymakers as to what the Measures of Growth helps us to understand in Maine's overall economic and community picture. I think the dynamics of creating a society here in Maine that has good economic opportunities, that has a great environment that fosters people desiring to live, work, and play here is important for many of our industries. I'm grateful for those members of both the legislature and those members of the business community who have stepped forward to serve on this. It's important to get a good pulse from them, and recognizing the importance of that, having Commissioner Gervais as a leader for our economic development areas has been very positive. I'm also appreciative of what Yellow has brought to this discussion. There's been some changes in leadership, and he has shown by his commitment, jumping in with both feet, how important he feels this is. Without Ryan Neal and the work he does to keep us both focused and on task, we'd have a little bit of a challenge with the many busy people we have. But the importance of this, now that we're at 21 years, is starting to look at this and defining how this policy blueprint should be better incorporated by those making policy, so that we can understand what is happening in our state, understand what we can affect, and understand what areas we as policymakers need to think long-term on, not just in 2-year cycles. So with that, I want to thank you for coming today to help us in promoting and educating folks on what goes into the work of the Growth Council and what we see as the next 20 years of our effort here. Thank you, Ryan.
My name is Steve Von Vogt. I'm the president of Maine Marine Composites. We're an ocean engineering firm in Portland. I'm also the managing director of Maine's Composite Alliance. I am very honored to follow Senator Cushing, and I've been very honored for a number of years to serve on the Growth Council. I'd like to take just a second and plug the Growth Council as the unique creature that it really is. There's very few people and very few organizations that are made up of such a diverse group. I'm the civilian co-chair. Senator Cushing is the legislative co-chair. But the group itself is made up of people ranging from union officials to people who are managing landowners to very prominent and busy business people. What is best about the Growth Council is that while it's a little bit lonely here today, it isn't lonely all fall, and that a lot of these busy people come together for a number of meetings to present this very important bipartisan report. A number of years ago, we consolidated the report and made it a little bit smaller. Beginning last year, we included a section of the high-level indicators that predict what's going to happen in Maine's economy. I think of that as the speedometer and the needle we have to push. Those indicators are gross domestic product, per capita personal income, value added per worker, employment, and poverty. Those are the factors that when the needle moves, it means something is happening in the state of Maine. The council takes a action-oriented approach, and we talk about a number of the levers of the economy that affect those factors. They include R&D spending. Without enough R&D spending, the innovation in our economy wilts. Without post-secondary education attainment, and specifically you'll see the indicators around 4th grade reading scores and 8th grade math scores, we have yet to get, as does much of the country, up to at least even parity in those scores. There are a number of other factors that I think are indicative of how well we're doing our jobs as both participants in the economy and as legislators. I think it is important for this report to be produced. It is the benchmark. It is an unusual report put out by an unusual group of people. And with that, I'd like to present the report to the people that can make the difference. Our legislative leadership, our representatives of the executive branch, both houses. And I stand here also representing our business community and our economy and our innovation economy. I'd like to hand the report. I'll hand it to Mike because he's to my left, and say, get on with your jobs now. Let's move the needle.
Thank you, Good afternoon. My name is Michael Hersey. I'm the Director of Business Development and Innovations in the Department of Economic and Community Development. At the Department of Economic and Community Development, we share with you the vision of a prosperous, vigorous Maine economy that benefits all people. Many positive steps have been taken towards that vision, but we have much more to do. As we travel the path towards that vision, we need to make well-informed decisions. Such reports as this provide insight into larger economic forces at play within our state. We applaud the work of the Maine Economic Growth Council and appreciate the public and private sector collaboration in assembling this report. Data must direct our policy decisions. Feel-good policies with little data on outcomes must not guide decision makers. Therefore, we value the Council's plans to identify, in the imminent future, how to best use the data to plan for Maine's economic future. Strong partnerships between the public and private sector build the foundation upon which the Growth Council can structure a framework for a stronger and more vital economy. We congratulate all Growth Council members on the release of the 2016 Measures of Growth Report. Thank you.
Hi there, my name is Jim Sear. I'm the communications director for Senate President Thibodeau. He regrets not being here today, but as you can probably hear, they're trying to finish up upstairs on the second floor. But he wanted to thank Ryan Neal for putting this all together with the Maine Development Foundation, and also thank the co-chairs of the Maine Economic Growth Council, Senator Andre Cushing and Stephen Von Vogt, who you both heard from. You know, the Senate President has always looked at this report as a barometer for not just where we are, but where we need to go. This year's report is no exception from what we've seen so far. And again, he wanted to thank you for your hard work in putting this all together. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Representative Jennifer DeChant, and I have the honor of representing the City of Bath, and I also have the honor of doing my second term as a member of the Economic Growth Council. So I want to just underscore from the legislative perspective certainly how important this document is. We've heard about how much work goes into it over the past several months, but that's just the pregame. Now that it's actually released is where the action is focused. And we received the 2015 document at the beginning of the session. So now we're talking to our colleagues about how this is the bookend. So this is not meant to be light, leisurely summer reading. Instead, it is meant to be a tool that when legislators leave session is that they use the next several months during the campaign and after the campaign to really start focusing on the content of all the policy that's in it, the documentation, the data. And so when one is developing legislation to submit, you can definitely put and use this document as a benchmark of how you and how your legislation will move the needle forward. So it is not something to be a dormant, inactive object. To the contrary, it is something that we, as members of the council, are committed to making it a live action item over the next couple of months, and being able to then track it when we're in the legislature and be able to make sure that we are linking action back to these indicators so that we are actually moving the needle forward on these very important indicators of our economy. Thank you.
Did any other council members want to speak? Luann, did you want to speak?
I'm Luann Ballesteros, Director of Government Relations at the Jackson Laboratory, and I'm also a Growth Council member. This is my first year. I have long admired the report. For 20 years I've looked at it, used it to guide different jobs that I've had, particularly at the Jackson Laboratory. I'd like to call your attention specifically to this page here where we talk about R&D. While I appreciate the fact that this document can guide future activities and future policy, it's important to note that we actually have an opportunity in the next couple of days to guide our future. So there are a couple of bills, 3 actually different items that we're measuring. So we have initiatives, policy initiatives around education, around transportation, around R&D that we're talking about here in this building today and tomorrow. And I'd like to ask specifically, because of what I do for work and the sector that I work for, that Louis Lucchini's bill, LD 1053, be paid special attention to. That is a bond bill that would recapitalize the Maine Technology Asset Fund with $50 million. I was in Orono last week and heard the governor say more than once that capital goes where it's welcomed and it stays where it's appreciated. And in the R&D field, particularly in that sector, there's lots of opportunity for capital to be welcomed and lots of opportunity for it to be appreciated. Thank you.
And we have some time for questions and hopefully answers, if there's any questions from the audience.
I'll ask a quick one,
Certainly.
which I think I already sent you an email after scanning through the report a little bit ago. I didn't see very many, you have stars and you have red warning flags, and then some things that are sort of in between. I didn't see a lot of stars. I saw a lot more red warning flags than stars. Is the Maine's economy getting worse? Are the indicators that you look at not progressing? What's happening?
Anyone? Go ahead, Steve.
As someone who's looked at a lot of these reports, the number of flags and stars doesn't differ a lot from past years. The stars are meant to call attention to something that is going well. The flags are meant to call attention to something that needs attention, not necessarily a bad thing. I think that this year's report is not a lot different than last year's report. What is interesting is that there are things we can do, and you see it if you look at the report over 10 or 15 years. You can see changes in indicators that indicate something we've done proactively. You can see when major research bonds passed, they show up in the indicators and trickle down through. You can see when the economy tanks, it shows up in the indicators. This is a long-term measure. It's something that we should be working to push the needle like Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill. And those primary indicators are important, but that's your observation is well taken. But I think if you go back 5 years, you'll see a lot more red flags than gold stars.
And the ones, there were two, and I think you referenced them briefly, about education, about
Yes.
fourth grade test
Fourth
results
grade
and-
reading scores and 8th grade math scores. I'm sorry. Both of them, if you look at the national data, you'll see the United States, everyone is striving to reach the median. You'll see that over the years, Maine has done better than many of its contemporaries, and it's done worse. But it's an area always of concern. Even when we improve from year to year, when less than half our kids are proficient, we're not doing our job.
And that was the point I was going to emphasize as well, Steve, is when you look at the K-12 education ratings, for example, we actually are ahead of the nation on several of those marks, and yet we've given them red flags. And one of the things I think that has always set apart measures of growth is that, unlike a lot of report cards, it actually sets a serious aspirational benchmark in each of these metrics of where the state needs to be. And in some cases, that absolute bar of where we think the performance needs to be is much higher than the nation. And so context is important, and this notion of where would we need to be in order to drive positive outcomes for the economy, instead of just a backwards looking status report on where we are.
Yeah.
So in the report on the Maine's workforce, in the past 2 years, we've seen declines in the workforce. This report shows an increase by 2020. Where does that increase come from?
Yeah, the workforce indicator, and a couple of things to note on this. The workforce went down while jobs went up fairly significantly. So we're already feeling the crunch with the labor markets. Based on these indicators, we'll expect to see even more of that going forward. That workforce number actually comes from a report that the Maine Development Foundation had done with the Maine State Chamber of Commerce a couple of years ago, called Growing Maine's Workforce. And we looked at different ways to do just that, to grow Maine's workforce. Part of it is obviously we need more people in the state. We need more people, we need younger people in particular to join the workforce and bolster that piece. We also looked at folks in Maine that are already here, but maybe aren't participating in the workforce to the extent that they could. So our aging population, aging workers, veterans in particular, the disabled population, and what we referred to as disengaged youth, young folks who aren't in school or aren't working. So there are some opportunities within the state, but no matter how we slice it, we're going to need more people, and we really need to look outside our borders to address a lot of that. Other comments on that?
Yeah, there was mention of Representative Keene's bonding package, and I'm just curious if the representatives that are here for the respective caucuses have a sense of where that bill is going.
Not at the moment. I can find out for you afterwards, though.
We're supposed to be caucusing that at 1 o'clock.
1 o'clock today? Because there appears to be like a large, there's a very big number, I'm told, on the appropriations table, somewhere in the vicinity of $1 billion of bonds. And, maybe, I don't know, maybe the treasurer can tell us how much can we actually afford to bond? And we suspect the governor's argument's gonna be, we don't wanna overextend ourselves. Is there any response to that? How much can we bond in 2016?
I can.
I'll
Go ahead.
I want to check with Senate President before I
Sure.
get back to you on that. So can we meet up later?
Yeah, I just have to give a disclaimer for the record that Maine Development Foundation is prohibited by statute from taking a position on bond issues. And we only infrequently take a position on specific legislation. And the Growth Council certainly has not taken positions on specific legislation. But we try to create that context for which proposals, which package of proposals should be getting serious consideration. And there's no question that R&D investment significantly trails both the national average and the benchmark of other large rural states by a significant margin. So I think the Growth Council as a whole would say we need to find a way to increase our investment, but haven't taken a position, and MDF certainly can't take a position on is this the right package that's in front of them right at this moment.
Just make one comment about the growth. Members of the Growth Council are appointed by the Senate President, the Speaker of the House, and the Governor. That should just tell you what kind of people you're getting. It's not everybody that gets appointed by all three. And that our perspective is a long-term perspective. You could ask me about legislation that's pending now. I don't have a clue. But I do have a clue about the research and development landscape in Maine over the last 20 years because I've worked in it. And I know how important investment in R&D is.
Is there anything that surprised you? Anything that you looked at and said, wow, either something going better than you thought or worse than you had hoped?
I would, other people should speak. For me, it was an eye-opener that Maine's air and water quality are extraordinary. And anyone who's traveled the world, been to China and other places, that's an important attribute, and that's something that we don't necessarily pay enough attention to. For me, that was an eye-opener. For others, I think there are things that were eye-openers for them.
As a member of the Energy, Utilities, and Technology Committee, I was struck by the broadband component of it and how multifaceted it is, and that the new data that's in the report is based on the take rate. So it's broadening from just the general availability to just because it's available doesn't mean that consumers are choosing to take it. And then, of course, the ratio with Connect Maine had just put out the 10 up, 10 down, and the discussion, we had a lot of discussion about how that would relate to residences as well as commercial. So it is, and then how does that play out within the rural communities and how there is a digital divide in that respect. So it really does put, for me, it puts that issue to the forefront because I think there is no denying that it's an economic driver. And there is still the diversity of how it's available and how it's implemented in the state. And I think that that's something that policymakers, at least certainly from the Energy, Utilities, and Technology Committee, and then certainly during this legislative session that we're taking into consideration.
One other comment, another eye-opener this year is that the cost of doing business in Maine is going down. And for those of us, most people, the assumption is that it's always going up and that relative to our neighbors, our cost is going down. That was another high point of this year's report.
Other questions, comments?
I'll ask one,
Yeah,
Ryan.
go
That
ahead.
index on page 13 of startup activity, is that's a new measure this year?
It's a new data set. We have had in the past an index of an entrepreneurial index that we got from the Kauffman Foundation. This data set that's in here currently replaces that. So previously, we were simply measuring the percentage of folks that were starting a new business. This cuts that a little differently. So it's part of it is the folks that are starting up a business, but then it looks into the factors of why they're starting a business and their success after they start the business. So we think it's a little more meaningful, speaking to that same issue more comprehensively. And obviously, startups are a huge part of Maine's economy, and if they grow, that's an even bigger part of Maine's economy. So.
Do you think you'll watch that year over year now?
Yep, our intent, we had some discussion in the council meetings about converting to this new data set, and our intent so far is to continue to monitor this particular data set as it goes forward. It's a brand new data set. I think it came out for the first time last year, so we only have 1 year's worth of data, but I think we'll continue to track this over the years.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Can someone talk just a little bit about the council's discussion about how we take the plan and work with policymakers in the coming year, specifically to sort of formulate something that can actually be implemented and that everybody can get behind to move the needle?
You want to take that one, Yellen?
I can try. Really, this benchmarking exercise is only one part of the mandate of the Growth Council from its inception back in the early 90s. And part two is charging the Growth Council with creating a 5 to 7 year economic action plan for the state of Maine. The council historically has never taken up that more ambitious part of its mandate. Ryan and I were reviewing some of the discussion in the first 1 or 2 years of the council's work, and I think they always viewed that as a phase two that they intended to get to. I think the question mark that the council wants to explore this summer is, can we build that action plan in a way that, like the report itself, continues to have broad, nonpartisan, objective credibility around it? Or will our consensus splinter as we try to tackle that somewhat more ambitious part of the charge? Our hope is that we can figure out a process and a way that we can extend this report into that second, more ambitious piece of developing that long-range, multi-year action plan for the state that can guide both legislatures and executive branch across electoral cycles. We're going to have at least a good, vigorous discussion about whether we can move in that direction over the coming years.
Other questions, comments? All right, I think we can call it a wrap. Thanks, everyone.
And I'm sure everyone will be available for comment, so
Absolutely.
by all means, if you've got someone you want to catch one-on-one.